This is 2017 A-level Economics MCQ paper. We'll start the discussion from this question 26. Right, the question says, suppose an economy is currently operating at an equilibrium level of output at rupees 3000 billion, and to achieve full employment equilibrium, it requires to produce an output level of rupees 4000 billion. This economy's marginal propensity to save is 0.2. What would be the most appropriate policy recommendation for this economy to achieve full employment equilibrium? All right, so if you just recognize the given values here, the first value is 3000 and that's the current level of national income. And if the economy achieves the full employment equilibrium, right, its national income will increase to 4000. So if this economy needs to achieve this full employment equilibrium, what they have to do is to increase their national income by 1000. So that's the desired change of the national income, right? If this change happens in the national income, the economy is able to achieve full employment equilibrium. And other than these two, they have given us this MPS, marginal propensity to save, and that's just 0.2. If it is 0.2, marginal propensity to consumption is 0.8. So this calculation is very much simple. The total of these two has to be always 1. So that if the first one is 0.2, obviously the second one has to be 0.8. All right. And if you look at the given answers, in these answers, they just talk about government spending and the direct taxes. See, government spending and direct taxes, both we recognize as autonomous components, right? So when these autonomous expenditure get increased, it always create a multiplier effect on the national income. So that it's better to first calculate the expenditure multiplier and the tax multiplier before we read all these given options, right? So how do we find this expenditure multiplier? The equation is 1 over 1 minus MPC, which is 1 over, let's say 1 minus 0.8. So 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2 and the answer is 1 over 0.2 is 5. So that's the autonomous expenditure multiplier. And on the other side, let me calculate the tax multiplier. So let me just recognize this as KE and this as KT. So tax multiplier is calculated as minus MPC over 1 minus MPC. So MPC is 0.8. So minus 0.8 over 1 minus again 0.8, which is equal to 0.8 over 0.2, and this answer is minus 4. See, the previous value is a positive value, but this value is a negative value, right? Now, let's read the first option. Okay, but before we read these options, always keep this in mind. The desired change that we need in the national income is just 1000. So you just need to figure out from which one of the given options the national income will change by 1000. Right. The first one, increase government spending by 1000 billion. So if government spending get increased by 1000, it will have a multiplier effect, and the calculated multiplier, the relevant multiplier is 5. So if government spending get increased by 1000, it will have a final impact on the national income, and that will be just 5000, which is not the desired level. The desired level is just 1000. Right. The second one, increase government spending by 500 billion. So if it is increased by 500 billion, the output will be how much then? I mean, the national income will increase ultimately by 2500 billion, which is again not the desired level. The third one, increase government spending by 250 billion. So 250 multiplied by 5 will give us again 1250, and that is also not the desired change that we expect in this economy. So none of these are the answers. The fourth one, decrease direct taxes by 1000 billion. So remember the tax multiplier is a minus value. So if you multiply this decrease, even this is a minus value. So if you multiply this decreased amount by the tax multiplier, it will generate this value plus 4,000. But our desired change is just 1,000. So this is also not the answer. But if you look at the last one, decrease direct taxes by 250. So this is a decrease, so that this 250 has to be a minus value. 250 you multiply by minus 4, which is the tax multiplier, and it will generate this value 1,000, and that's the desired change of the national income. So this is the answer for this question 26. Answer is the fifth one. Right, now we'll move to this question 27. This says the table below presents data on the components of aggregate expenditure and national income for an open economy with the government sector, where C is for consumption. So we know the letters. So the question is, under which situation is this economy in disequilibrium? Right. So we all know that at the macroeconomic equilibrium, aggregate expenditure needs to be equal to the aggregate income. Clear? And this aggregate expenditure consists of these components C plus I plus G plus NX, right? So that the total of all these four components must be equal to Y. And if I expand this NX, what do we find inside this NX? We get exports minus imports. So that has to be equal to the national income, which is given on the right side corner in this table, right? And if you look at the column headings here, you can use these columns to calculate the aggregate expenditure, and you need to see whether that aggregate expenditure becomes equal to the aggregate income. If so, the economy is in equilibrium, otherwise it's in disequilibrium, right? So for example, if you look at this first option given, check here the total of these two. 250 plus 50 is 300. 300 plus 100 is 400. 475. And this has to be a minus value. So that will be 450. See, the expenditure comes as 450. But the aggregate income is given to us as 400. And the two are not equal. Which means in this given situation, the economy is in disequilibrium. And that's why we select that to be the answer. But look at the second option. Let's see what happens there. If you get the total of these four, how much is that? 300 plus 100 is 400. This is 450. 525. From 525, this is a minus value because it's imports. From 525, if you deduct that 25, you get the aggregate expenditure as 500, which is equal to the given national income, aggregate income. So that in this given situation, the economy is in equilibrium. So likewise, if you just check the other options, in all these options, the aggregate expenditure will become equal to the aggregate income. So no need to calculate. So simply this is the answer. Right, now look at this question 28. What's meant by the term value of money? All right. So the term value of money stands for this. Imagine that you have rupees 100,000 and there's only one good in that given economy. Just to make the explanation simple, imagine that there is only one good in that given economy and the price of this good is just 1,000, right? So this is your, let's say, salary or whatever the rupee amount that you have, and this is the price of the good. And if you calculate the value of money, it gives you the number of goods that you can purchase by this given rupee amount. So for example, in this given case, 100,000 divided by 1,000 will give you 100, and that's the value of money. So if I ask this question once again, what's this 100? What's the meaning of this 100? So this is simply the amount of goods that can be purchased by the given rupee amount. By the given rupee amount. Right? So this is the idea behind the term value of money. So the first option says the amount of goods and services that can be purchased with a given amount of. So this is the answer, right? It's a direct question. This is very easy. Value of money is exactly equal to this. So no point of going through these other options because the answer is very clear. Right, now look at this question 29. It says an inflationary gap could be reduced. Okay, so this inflationary gap arises, I mean, according to this Keynesian approach under demand pull inflation, you recognize that this inflationary gap arises when the aggregate demand exceeds the aggregate supply. If not, in other words, when the aggregate expenditure exceeds the aggregate income, this inflationary gap arises. So if you need to reduce this inflationary gap, right? If it is required to reduce this inflationary gap, you simply need to reduce this aggregate demand, or you simply need to reduce this aggregate expenditure, right? So if it's possible to reduce one of these, you can reduce the inflationary gap as well. So we just need to read these given options and recognize which option reduces aggregate demand or the aggregate expenditure. All right. So the first one is an increase in government spending. See that now. Aggregate expenditure consists of C, I, G, N, X. These are the components we find inside the aggregate expenditure. And if government spending is increased, it will increase the aggregate expenditure as well. හැබැයි අපිට වෙන්න ඕනේ මොකද්ද? අපිට වෙන්න ඕනේ දේ තමයි aggregate expenditure should decrease. හැබැයි අපිට උවමනා දේ වෙන්නේ නැති නිසා this is not the answer. Second one, an increase in the supply of money. So when the money supply is increased, right? Hope you remember when the money supply, let me write here, money supply is increased, then what happens to the interest rate in the economy? Interest rate decreases, and when interest rate decreases, consumption increases, even investment increases, right? As a result, what will happen to the aggregate demand or the aggregate expenditure? What will happen? As a result, see, when interest rate get decreased, both consumption and investment will increase. That will again increase the aggregate expenditure. So the same outcome that we discussed in the first one. So this is again not the answer there. The third one, an increase in income tax rate. See that now, when the income tax rate is increased, right? When the income tax rate is increased, what happens to these components we find inside this aggregate expenditure? When the tax rate is increased, consumption reduces, and when consumption reduces, aggregate expenditure reduces, and අපිට උවමනා දේ වුණා. Aggregate expenditure reduces, if not, aggregate demand reduces, and when aggregate demand reduces, we can reduce the inflationary gap as well. So the third one is the answer, but we will read the other two options as well. Fourth one says a decrease in the central bank discount rate. See, once again, when the central bank discount rate is decreased, look at this one. Discount rate, or simply the interest rate, when it is decreased, what happens? Ability to create credit increases. As a result, again, money supply increases, the bank interest rates get reduced, so bank interest rates get reduced. So once again, consumption increases, investment increases. As a result, aggregate expenditure will increase. එතකොට ඒක option එකක් වෙන්න බෑ එහෙනම්. Right. So that is also wrong then. The fifth one, a decrease in the statutory reserve ratio. See, once again, when the statutory reserve ratio is decreased, what happens to the excess reserves maintained by the commercial banks? When SRR is decreased, excess reserves will increase. So once again, the ability to create credit will increase, and then the money supply will increase. As a result, what will happen? Again, consumption and investment will increase. So the same outcome, right? So that is also not the answer. So answer for this question 29 is the third one, right? Question 30. This says, what will be the probable effects of an increase in the value added tax on demand pull inflation and cost push inflation? Okay, according to this question, even now there is a particular percentage as the value added tax. So let's say that is just 15%, and the government is going to increase this from 15% to 18%. So when the VAT rate is increased, you just need to find the impact on demand pull inflation and the cost push inflation. So this is very simple, and this is how you need to think about this answer. Okay, we will send this to the other side. All right, now look at this one. Right, so just think that VAT get increased from 15% to 18%. So when the VAT is increased, what happens to the individual's real income, the purchasing power? Real income, let me write, real income decreases. If not, simply purchasing power decreases. When purchasing power decreases, what happens to the consumption? Even consumption decreases. When consumption decreases, what happens to the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is decreased. If the aggregate demand decreases, what happens to this demand pull inflation? That will definitely decrease. So one of these two must be the answer, but we'll look at the other side as well. Now, as a result of this increase in VAT rate, what happens to the cost push inflation? See, if I draw the relevant curves, let me take the real output to this side and the price level to this axis, right? Just imagine that this is the aggregate supply and this is the aggregate demand. And when the VAT rate is increased, what happens to this aggregate supply curve? The aggregate supply curve gets shifted to the left side. Aggregate supply decreases, and as a result, see what happens to the price level. Previously, this was the price level. Let's recognize that as P1. And after the VAT is increased, the supply curve get decreased. I mean, supply reduces, so that the supply curve gets shifted to the left side. And as a result, what happens to the price level? Price level increases. See, the two have two different impacts. The demand pull, as a result of increasing this VAT rate, demand pull inflation decreases, but the cost push inflation, the supply side inflation increases. So that the answer for this question 30 is the first one. Right. Question number 31. Which one of the following assets is most liquid? So the most liquid one is always money, but other than money, since we don't have any option for money here, the next most liquid asset is the demand deposits. Simply, this is the money that you have deposited in your current accounts, and you have the ability to use them for transactions via checks. So in this given list, this is the most liquid asset. And secondly, you get the money in savings account. Then you get the treasury bills. Then comes this treasury bonds, and the least liquid asset here is the real estate. So that's the fifth, right? So the answer for this question 31 is the third one. That's very easy. Right, now we will move to this question 32. Right, look at this question 32. Suppose you deposit rupees 10,000 in your deposit account in a commercial bank. Okay. If the bank wishes to hold 20% of all deposits on reserve, how much new deposits can it create as a direct result of your deposit? Okay, so there are two important words here. The first one is how much new deposit. The other one is direct result of your deposit. Okay, so let me explain the first one. New deposit means, see, when you deposit a certain amount in the bank keeps the statutory reserve and the rest the bank can lend. So when the bank lends this money, the customer takes the money, goes to another bank and opens another demand deposit. So that is the meaning of this new deposit thing. In this context, new deposit must be equal to the immediate loan that the bank can create, right? The credit that the bank can create. Enisa, this is somewhat equal to the initial loan provided by this given commercial bank, right? So we'll discuss the question and finally I'll explain the meaning of the second part, direct result of your deposit. That part I'll explain again, right? Okay, now we have this customer and the customer goes to his commercial bank, and deposits this 10,000. So when the person deposits rupees 10,000, the bank holds 20% on that as the statutory reserve. So 10,000 into 20% just give you 2,000. So that this excess reserve is 8,000 and this excess reserve is the initial loan that can be provided by this commercial bank. So let me write this is equal to the initial loan that is provided by this given commercial bank. That's 8,000. Okay, the next part, when this first commercial bank offers this loan to the customers, it creates a multiplier effect. එතකොට ඔයාට මේකේ banking system එකේ impact එක බලන්න ඕන. So let me write here the impact on banking system, right? The impact on banking system. So see that now. The total loans that can be created as a result of this initial loan, how much is that? That is the initial loan multiplied by the deposit multiplier. So let me write deposit multiplier. So initial loan is just 8,000 and deposit multiplier is equal to 1 over SRR. That is 8,000 into 1 over 0.2. So 1 over 0.2 is just 5. So 8,000 into 5 gives us 40,000, right? So this initial loan creates a total amount of 40,000. All right, now we will go to the question again and read this one more time. Right, the question says, suppose you deposit rupees 10,000 in your deposit account in a commercial bank. If the bank wishes to hold 20% of all deposits on reserve, how much new deposits can it create as a direct result of your deposit? See that now, even in the previous question paper, I think we discussed this in 2016 A-level paper, we recognize this as the direct outcome, right? What happens in your commercial bank, that's the direct outcome. And the rest we just recognize as the indirect outcome, right? So the question asks for the direct result that happens, the direct new deposit that the commercial bank, your commercial bank can create. And then how much is that? That is 8,000. Then the answer for this question is 8,000. Right. So 8,000 is here in the first option. So question 32, first one is the answer. Right. Now look at this question 33. It says, which of the following happens when the central bank reduces its policy interest rates? අපි මේ චුට්ටක කලිනුත් ඒ වගේම කතාවක් කතා කළා. එහෙනම් what happens when the central bank reduces its policy interest rates? So let me write policy interest rate is reduced, right? Policy interest rate is reduced. And when this policy interest rate is reduced, the commercial banks can increase their excess reserves. So excess reserves in commercial banks will increase. When excess reserves get increased, their ability to create credit also increases. So that the money supply increases, and as a result, bank interest rates will decrease. So when I say bank interest rate decreases, එතන interest rates දෙකක් තියෙනවා. එකක් තමයි interest rate on loans. So this decreases. Even the interest rate on deposits දෙකම අඩු වෙනවා. Even the interest rate on deposits මේකත් අඩු වෙනවා. එහෙනම් මොකද වෙන්නේ? The customers can obtain loans at lower rates, and at the same time, if they deposit their money in the bank, the interest rate that they receive also reduces. ඔය ටික තමයි වෙන්නේ. ඒතර ඔය ටික ඔළුවේ තියාගෙන we will read this options given. Right, the first one, the demand for money decreases and market interest rate decreases. Okay, then අපි දන්නවා මෙහෙම කතන්දරයක්. මොකද්ද? If the interest rate is low, right? If the interest rate is low, the demand for money, if not specifically, this is the speculative demand for money. Speculative demand for money. So in between these two variables, the interest rate and the speculative demand for money, we have a negative relationship. So if the bank interest rates get decreased, what happens? The speculative money demand increases. එතකොට first option says the demand for money decreases, so that it's wrong, and the market interest rates decreases. This is true, but the first part is wrong. Second part says the demand for money increases, yes, and the interest rates increase. No, that's wrong. The third one, the supply of money decreases. No, the money supply, see, money supply increases. That's wrong. Then market interest rates decreases. That is true. And the fourth one, the supply of money increases. Yes, true. Market interest rates decreases. Even this is true. See, both sides are true. So that the answer for this question 33 is the fourth one. But we'll read the fifth one as well. The demand for money, the supply of money, and the market interest rates increase. Either now, this is true. Demand for money is increased. Speculative demand for money increases. Money supply increases, but the market interest rates will decrease. So that's why this is wrong. Right. Before we move to this question 35, we will send all these to the other side. Right, now look at this question 34. The primary goal of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in the conduct of its monetary policy at present is. See that now these things are very specific things and we can't change these. So let me just show you the theory. These are theoretical things. So let me show you the theory note related to this and you will recognize the answer. Right, look at this note now. So we get the monetary policy of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And here it says the current monetary policy of the central bank combines features of both monetary targeting and flexible inflation targeting. Then I have explained the two. And then we get this note. When these two are combined, the central bank aims to maintain inflation within a mid-single digit range in the medium term while supporting economic growth. So that's why I told you that these are theoretical things and we can't just change these. So that the answer is the first one. It says to stabilize inflation at mid-single digit over the medium term. So that's the exact answer. So there can be only one answer for such questions. So no point of discussing the other options. Right. So come to this question 35. Right. Here it says, what will happen to the money supply and the equilibrium interest rate if central bank sells securities in the open market? Okay, so just imagine that we have Central Bank of Sri Lanka on this side, and on the other side we get the commercial banks. Right, so let's recognize them as commercial banks. So the central bank sells securities in the open market. So central bank sells the treasury bills and treasury bonds to the commercial banks. Let's say selling securities. And when the commercial banks buy these securities, they pass their excess reserves to the central bank. So reserves, right? Reserves get transferred to the central bank. And as a result, what happens to the excess reserves maintained by the commercial banks? That reduces. When the excess reserves get reduced, their ability, right? Their ability to create credit decreases, so that even the money supply decreases, and when the money supply decreases, interest rates will increase. Okatama answer. Again, if you look at the impact on money supply, wait, I'll take this one here. Right, now look at this one. The impact on money supply will see decrease, money supply decreases. So one of these become the answer. Then equilibrium interest rate. So what happens to interest rate in the market? That increases. So the answer for this question 35 is the second one. Right. 36. An example of a pure public good is, okay, see the now we have received this same question, not the exact same thing, but a question from pure public good in almost all the past papers. So by now you should have understood this properly. The example for pure public good that is available here is the national defense. Even we have written these same set of examples in our notebooks as well. So that's the obvious answer. Right. Now look at this question 37. It says, given in this diagram are the marginal private benefit and the marginal social benefit curves and the market supply curve for a particular good. All right. So if you look at the diagram, you can recognize that there is only one supply curve, but you get two demand curves. The first one is based on the marginal private benefit, but the second one is based on the marginal social benefit. So if you just recognize the positions of these two demand curves, see the demand curve which is based on the marginal social benefit is on the right side of the demand curve based on the marginal private benefit. And what does that mean? Private benefit is lower than the social benefit. If not, in other words, social benefit is higher than the private benefit. Why is that? Because there must be positive externalities, right? There must be positive externalities in, see, these are related to the demand curves. So that there must be positive externalities in consumption, right? There must be positive externalities in consumption, right? So if there are positive externalities in consumption, we normally recognize such goods as merit goods. And normally what happens, the market allocation of resources to provide these merit goods is very low. So we have under allocation, right? We get under allocation of resources into these merit goods. If not, in other words, we have under allocation of resources for the goods with positive externalities in consumption. Right now, keeping this knowledge in mind, we will go to the provided answers. Right, the first one says, in the absence of government intervention in this market, okay, if there's no government intervention, misallocation of resources is likely to occur because of which one of the following reasons? Okay, the first one, the free market price is too high. Just think. So the market price has to be the price that get decided based on the supply curve and the demand curve that are based on private benefits and private costs. So that this has to be the market price and this has to be the socially optimum price. See, the market price is actually lower than the socially optimum price, right? So this is not true then. The second one, there is overproduction of the good of H2J. There's no overproduction as we discussed. If the goods have positive externalities in consumption, there is always under allocation, under production from the market. So this is also not true then. Third one, free market output is too high. See now, the allocation is very minimum so that there cannot be a too large supply in the market for such goods. So this is also wrong there. Fourth one, there is under consumption of the good H2J. See that now there is under allocation of resources, under supply, so that the consumption will also be lower than the desired level, because this is the desired level of the consumption or the production, but this is the market allocation, so that we have under allocation or under production, or we have under consumption of such goods. So this is the answer for the question. But look at the fifth one, negative externality in consumption. No, we have positive externalities in consumption, and that's why the demand curve based on the social benefit lies on the demand curve based on marginal private benefit. Right. Then the answer for this 37th is the fourth one. Right. Now look at this question 38. It says the government revenue to GDP, the government revenue to GDP ratio and the government expenditure to GDP ratio in Sri Lanka in recent years were approximately. See that now? This answer is not going to be relevant to your exam, so I'm going to skip this one. Right. 39th question. It says, according to their relative importance in total expenditure, the main components of recurrent expenditure of Sri Lankan government can be ranked as, okay, can be ordered as. Even this order has changed recently. So this answer is not going to be relevant for your exam. So I'm going to skip this question as well. Right. The 40th question. The widely used credit instrument in domestic financing budget deficit of Sri Lanka, see again in recent years, not relevant to your A-level year. So we'll skip this question as well. Okay. Move to the other side. Question 41. In Japan, it takes 50 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth and 100 labor hours to produce 1 unit of rice. In Thailand, it takes 200 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth and 200 labor hours to produce 1 unit of rice. Okay, remember, these are the inputs, right? These values represent the amount of inputs required to produce cloth and rice. So remember, this question you receive from the input approach. Right, this is a question related to international trade. You can obviously understand that. And it comes from this input approach. Okay, so before we do anything, let me tabulate the given information. So we have two countries, we get Japan, we get Thailand, and in these two countries, they produce clothes and also they produce rice. And in Japan, to produce one piece of cloth, it requires 50 labor hours and 100 labor hours to produce rice, 1 unit of rice. And in Thailand, it takes 200 labor hours to produce clothes and another 200 labor hours to produce rice. So which of the following statement is true for this given situation? So if you look at the table, it talks about the comparative advantage and the absolute advantage. So we can simply recognize the countries with absolute advantage. So absolute advantage is always about the highest productivity. So I told you that these are the inputs required. So the country that uses the lowest amount of inputs to produce the given unit of output has the highest productivity. ඒ නිසා අපි clothes වලට බැලුවොත් එහෙම right clothes වලට Japan 50 inputs use කරනවා but Thailand uses 200 inputs. So which country has the absolute advantage in producing clothes in Japan? And rice වලට බැලුවොත් එහෙම again see Japan has the absolute advantage because they just use only 100 units of inputs to produce 1 unit of output. And so Japan has the absolute advantage in producing both goods. එතකොට මේගොල්ලෝ කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? Thailand has an absolute advantage in production of rice, which is totally wrong. ඒතර ඒ වගේ තව ඒවා තියෙනවාද අපිට? Absolute advantage ගැන කතා කරන්න ඒවා නැහැ. Right. The next set of options talk about the comparative advantage. So you need to calculate opportunity cost to recognize this country with a comparative advantage for the given product. But be careful, right? This is the input approach. So how do we find this opportunity cost under input approach? How do we find the opportunity cost under input approach? So normally, if you get the output, how do we find the opportunity cost of good X? This is under output approach, right? Output approach. So under output approach, if you are calculating the opportunity cost of good X, ඔයා කරන්නේ මෙන්න මේ equation use කරන එක delta y divided by delta x. This is the equation under output approach. But under input approach, what do we take? We take the reciprocal of the previous equation to calculate this opportunity cost. So let me write again. Opportunity cost of good X, right? Opportunity cost of good X under input approach is delta X over delta Y, right? Delta X over delta Y. So you calculate the opportunity cost of good X and the equation comes as delta X over delta Y, right? Now let me find those values, the opportunity cost values related to this table. Right. So for the time being, let's consider clothes to be X and rice to be Y. So how do we find this opportunity cost there? You need to get the change of X. So change of X in Japan is just 50. 50 divided by change of Y. Y is 100. So that you get the answer, the opportunity cost as 0.5. And for rice, it's 100 over 50. So that the answer is just 2. And in Thailand, right, the opportunity cost of producing clothes is 200 over 100, which is equal to 2. And the opportunity cost of producing rice is, sorry, my mistake. This is 200 over 200, right? X is 200, even Y is 200. So the answer is 1, my mistake, right? Here also, you get the same thing. delta y is 200, delta x is also 200, then the answer is once again 1. Okay, now we will recognize the country with the comparative advantage for each product. Okay, if it's for clothes, right, the opportunity cost of producing clothes in Japan is just 0.5, but in Thailand it's just 1. So that Japan has the lowest opportunity cost of producing cloth. And on the other side, if you look at the rice production, Thailand has the lowest opportunity cost of producing rice. Clear? So the comparative advantage of producing clothes is with Japan, and that of producing rice is with Thailand. Right? So if you have calculated these values, you can very easily recognize the answer for this one. We'll read the first option. Japan has comparative advantage in producing rice. See, Japan has the comparative advantage in producing clothes, not rice. So this is wrong then. Second one we discussed earlier, that's wrong anyway. The third one, Japan has comparative advantage in producing clothes, and that is 100% true. So the answer for this question 41 is the third one. All right. Now let's look at the question 42. International trade permits a country to, first one, produce and consume beyond its production possibilities boundary. See that now. It's true due to the advantages of exchange, the countries can consume more than what they can produce. That's true. But the problem is with this part of the sentence, right? This is not 100% certain. Just because the country get into international trade, it doesn't always ensure that they can produce beyond their PPC. So this part is correct, but this part is wrong. The second option says shifts its production possibilities boundary outward, which is not 100% certain. The third one, lower the per unit production cost of all goods which is producing. See, it doesn't ensure just because the countries get engaged in international trade, import and export, it doesn't always ensure that they can produce all goods at a lower cost, which is again wrong. The fourth one, expand its production possibilities while holding constant its consumption possibilities. No, the consumption possibility will always increase, right? It will not be held constant. It will increase for sure thanks to international trade, right? The fifth option says the problem with the fourth one is the first part is wrong. Even the second part is wrong, right? Expand its production possibilities curve, holding, no, both parts are wrong, right? Then the fifth one, consume beyond its production possibilities boundary, 100% true. This is what we say advantages of exchange, right? So due to the advantages of exchange, the country can consume than what it produces. Okay, mama, andala pennothema. Imagine that this is this good X and this is the good Y, and this is the PPC related to this country. Right? That's a PPC related to this country. Okay, just assume that they are going to specialize in producing this good Y. If so, the PPC, nothing happens to the PPC, it will just be the same PPC. But if you draw another curve just to represent the consumption possibilities, this is how you get that. Consumption possibilities curve will be on the right side, which means this is what they can produce and the consumption is higher than what they can produce. Okay, so the answer for this question 42 is the fifth one. So why does this happen? Due to the advantages of exchange, if not due to the gains from exchange, right? 43. It says the current account plus the financial account of the balance of payment is equal to. Okay, so this is very simple. If you know equations lesson in mathematics, you can just find the answer for this one. according to this BPM6 format, right? When you develop the balance of payment, the total of the current account balance and the capital account balance and financial account balance and the errors and omission account balance. Errors and omission account balance. When you get the total of these four, right, that total needs to be equal to 0. And if you assume that there's no any error in the recording of transactions, you can consider this part to be 0. If not, you can simply ignore that. So if there's no errors in the recording of transactions, what needs to happen? The current account balance plus capital account balance plus financial account balance needs to be equal to 0. Then make a podi kala mathematics. You keep these two terms on the same side of the equation and you send this one to the other side. So what will happen then? See, the current account plus, from this side you get again financial account balance, and you send this component to the other side, because on that side, on the right side, we anyway have 0. When you send this capital account balance to the other side, it becomes a minus value. So capital account balance. See what happened now. See, hope you understand this. The total of the current account and the financial account is equal to the capital account balance. But the problem, the signs will be different, right? Because we can ensure again whether we get a positive value or a negative value in the current account. But somehow the signs will differ because this is a minus value, but still the magnitudes are same, right? If you get 100 here, on this side also you get 100. Ignore the signs, then the two will be equal. All right, then the answer is, see, current account plus the financial account of the balance of payment is equal to not 0, not 1, not to the trade balance, but to the net capital account balance. So this is the answer for the question. Right, now look at this question 44. But before that, we will send all these previous calculations to the other side. We don't need this anymore. All right, now everything is clear. So look at this question 44 now. It says, if the price of Japanese yen declines considerably against the Sri Lankan rupee. All right, so there are two different approaches to check this. The first one, let's assume in this way. Let's assume that the rupee, 1 rupee, or in other words, let's write initially, if 1 yen is rupees, let's say 200, just to make the calculations easy. And in the second situation, what happens? 1 yen is just rupees 100. So the yen price has decreased against the Sri Lankan rupee. And this is the first situation, as I mentioned earlier. If not, we recognize this as the direct quotation system, right? Direct quotation method. And if you look at the values under indirect quotation method, let me write it here. Indirect quotation method or system, right? So based on these values, if we convert them into indirect quotation system, 1 rupee, right? 1 rupee is equal to, so 1 over 200 yen, right? 1 over 200 yen. So how much is that? 1 over 100 is 0.001. So a half of that. So 0.005. But now the situation has changed. 1 rupee is equal to 1 over 100 yens, which is just 0.01. Okay. So if you understood this simple thing, you can find the answer very easily. Right. Now look at this. Right. Now look at this one. Sri Lankan goods are relatively cheaper for Japanese consumers. See that now? imagine that the Japanese consumer imported, I mean simply Japan imports Sri Lankan products, and the value of the product, let's assume that to be just 1 rupee. Previously, they just paid 0.005 yen to purchase that thing. But after this rupee appreciation happens, right, to purchase that same good, they have to pay a higher amount. Now they just need to pay 0.01 yen to purchase the same thing. See, after rupee appreciation happens, what has happened? The Sri Lankan goods have become expensive for the Japanese consumers, not cheaper. So this is wrong there. The second one, Japanese goods are relatively cheaper for Sri Lankan consumers. Now they just talk about the opposite. See, now it's better if you look at the direct quotation method to recognize whether this is true or false. See, imagine now we were importing Japanese goods. Previously, before this rupee appreciation, we had to pay rupees 200 just to import this good worth 1 yen in Japan. But after rupee appreciation, we just need to pay only 100 rupees. එහෙනම් මොකද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ මේ කියන කතාව ඇත්ත. මොකද කතාව ඇත්ත කියලා කියන්නේ the Japanese goods are relatively cheaper for Sri Lankan consumers. That's true. Then this is the answer for this question. Answer, the best thing is always you just calculate, you just present the exchange rate under direct quotation method and indirect quotation method. එතකොට A option එකේදී ඒ දෙපැත්තෙන් කොයික හරි බලලා you can recognize the correct answer easily. Right. We will go through the other options as well. Demand for Sri Lankan rupees would increase in Japan. See that now? Then Japanese කට්ටිය ඉස්සර ඒගොල්ලෝ රුපියල් එකක් demand කරනකොට ඒගොල්ලෝ රුපියල් එකක් අරගත්තොත් they just had to pay 0.005 yen. But now if they demand rupees, for each rupee, they will have to pay a higher amount. So that they are not going to demand Sri Lankan rupees in this given situation. Right? After appreciation happens, they are not going to demand Sri Lankan rupees much. Right? So this is wrong then. Even the first one is wrong. The fourth one, it would encourage more Japanese tourists to visit Sri Lanka. දැන් අපි හිතමුකෝ අපි ඒගොල්ලෝ ලංකාවට ඇවිල්ලා ලංකාවේ රුපියලක ප්‍රොඩක්ට් එකක් පර්චේස් කරනවා කියලා. කලින් ගිය අවුරුද්දේ ලංකාවට ඇවිල්ලා මේක පර්චේස් කළා නම් they only need to pay අර එකම ස්ටෝර් එකේ මම කියන්නේ they only need to pay 0.005. But ඒගොල්ලෝ මේ අවුරුද්දේ આવොත් to purchase that same thing they will have to pay a higher amount. ඉතින් එතකොට ඒගොල්ලෝ එන එක පොඩ්ඩක් අඩු වෙන එක තමයි වෙන්නේ. වැඩි වෙන එක වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Right, the fifth one, it would discourage more Sri Lankan tourists visiting Japan. ඉතින් අපි කොහොමද මේක ගැන හිතන්න ඕන? ඔයා හිතන්න, ඔයා trip එක ඔයා tour එක plan කළේ last year. ඔයා plan කළා ඔයා Japanese අර museum එක අරක මේක බලන්න යනකොට ඔයාට Japanese yen උවමනා වුණා, let's say rupees නෙමෙයි Japanese yen 1000 උමනා වුණා. ඒතකොට ඒ කාලේ තිබුණ රේට් එකට 1000 yen equals 1000 into 200. So that will be 200 and another 3 zeros. ඒතකොට this was your cost when you planned the trip last year. Right? But now even in this year you just plan the same trip, same tour, and the cost is still same in terms of Japanese yen. But after this rupee appreciation, the exchange rate is just 1 yen equals 100. එනිසා ඔයාට අර කලින් trip එකම දැන් යන්න පුළුවන් just for rupees 100,000. Now you get more encouraged to visit Japan. You would love to go Japan now. එනිසා මෙතන කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? It would discourage more Sri Lankan tourists visiting Japan. Once again wrong. මේකේ opposite තමයි true. So the answer for this question 44 is the second one. Right, now look at this question 45. It says, an economy's gross national income per capita based on purchasing power parity has increased over a certain period of time. Okay, so per capita GNI based on purchasing power parity has increased over time, but its development measured by Human Development Index has remained unchanged. What could explain the difference? Okay. So this is how we need to think about this thing. So we will just check how to calculate this Human Development Index. So once you recognize how to find this Human Development Index, we can recognize what has happened in this given situation. So let me show you the note related to that. This is how it is calculated. I mean, these are the criteria that they check when calculating this Human Development Index, right? They just calculate it based on these three main criteria: health, knowledge, and the decent standard of living. So how do we evaluate each? Health is evaluated based on life expectancy at birth. Knowledge is evaluated based on expected years of schooling and mean years of schooling. And this decent standard of living is evaluated based on purchasing power parity per capita GNI. So the question, if you go back to the question, it says that this GNI per capita based on purchasing power parity has increased, but nothing happened to Human Development Index. Clear? So let's go back to the theory note again. As per the question, this purchasing power parity GNI per capita has increased, but when this Human Development Index is calculated based on all these three criteria, nothing has happened to its value. But this thing, the last indicator, has increased. Why is that? මොකද මේකින් increase වෙච්ච amount එක මේ අනිත් indicators වලින් මොනවා වෙලා තියෙන්න ඕනද? දැන් මෙතන positive value එකක් ආව නම් මේ තැන් දෙකෙන් එකක එහෙම නැත්නම් තැන් දෙකේම if we get negative values, අන්න එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ? Nothing will happen to Human Development Index. දැන් අපි තුමු මේක 0.3 කියලා, මෙයා 0.3 නම් මෙතන value එක આવොත් 0.1 සහ මෙතන value එක આવොත් 0.2. එතන අර HDI එක කලින් තිබ්බ value එකේම තියෙනවා. එහෙනම් අපි දැන් තේරුම් ගත්තා if this is something right, this is actually something positive, right? If this is positive, අපිට වෙන්න ඕනේ මොකද්ද? මේ දෙකේ පොඩි negative indication එකක් තමයි එන්න ඕනේ. Life expectancy at birth should decrease. If not, the expected years of schooling should decrease. If not, the mean years of schooling should decrease. ඔක තමයි වෙන්න ඕනේ. එහෙනම් ඔය දේවල් වලින් මේ decrease වෙන්න ඕනේ කියලා කියපු දේවල් වලින් කොයි එකද answer එකේ තියෙන්නේ කියන එක recognize කරන එක තමයි අපේ job එක. Right. Now we'll go back to the question. First one, increase in the number of expected years of schooling. So that is something favorable again, right? In that particular option, they say that even this, the expected years of schooling is increasing, right? That is increasing. Then obviously මේකත් increase වෙලා. එහෙනම් මේකත් increase වුණොත් then this Human Development Index will increase, but it remains same in this given question. So that can't be the answer, right? So this can't be the answer, but the second one, a decline in the life expectancy at birth, 100% true. As we discussed, if this thing has increased and if nothing happens to HDI, right? Either this should decrease or this should decrease. As per the second option, what they say, the life expectancy at birth has decreased. If so, this is possible to happen. Then that's the answer for our question. Right. So that's the answer. Third one, a decrease in the adult literacy rate. See, this is not a consideration when calculating Human Development Index. The fourth one, an increase in the rate of inflation. Again, not a consideration when calculating HDI. Last one, an increase in the rate of population growth. See, the population growth is not considered in the calculation of HDI. නිසා මේ තුනම කිසිම අදාළත්වයක් නැහැ. If this happens, HDI will increase, but if this happens, HDI may remain same. So the answer for this question 45 is this. Right, look at this question 46 now. It says the Lorentz curve in the diagram below depicts the distribution of household income in an economy. All right. Then what do they ask us to calculate by giving this thing? How is the Gini coefficient of the inequality of income distribution in this economy is measured? Very simple. නිකන් ස්ටැටිස්ටික්ස් ක්ලාස් එකට ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවා නම් මේක කිසිම ප්‍රශ්නයක් නෑ. ඔය ඉකොනොමික්ස් කළත් මේක nothing. මොකද හැමෝම මේ equations දීලා තියෙනවා. So how do you calculate this Gini coefficient? Gini coefficient is calculated by taking this ratio. මොකද්ද ratio එක? We first take the area covered by the equidistributed line and the Lorentz curve. Right? We first take that region. So this is this equidistributed line and this is the real Lorentz curve. So you take the region covered by the equidistributed line and the Lorentz curve, which is the region B in this case. Then you take the entire region below the equidistributed line. See, this is the equidistributed line, if not 45-degree line. So you just consider the entire region below this. So that entire region consists of two components, that is the component B and the component C. This entire region is B plus C. So this ratio we recognize as the Gini coefficient. So this ratio is presented by B divided, see the now, that ratio is presented by area B divided by area B plus area C. So this is the answer. Right, let's move to the other side. 47. Right, look at this one. It says the table below presents some data pertaining to the labor market in a hypothetical economy at a given year. So what are the values we receive? You get the working age population, and that's 25 million. You get the unemployed population, that's just 3 million. And the rate of employment is given to us as 80. Then අතර මෙතන පොඩි දෙයක් හංගලා වගේ තියෙන. එහෙම හැංගුවට අපිට අතර එක පේනවා. මොකද්ද? If the rate of employment is just 80, then obviously the rate of unemployment has to be the opposite of that. So that has to be then 20%. ඒතර ඒක අපිට දුන්නේ නැති වුණාට අපිට ඒක හරියම පැහැදිලිව පේනවා. එතකොට see the now. Then again we see a connection between these two. මොකද්ද? The unemployed population is just 3% in this economy, and if you calculate that as a percentage, that will be just 20%. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ 20% කියන ඒ ratio එක දීලා තියෙන්නේ නැත්නම් ඒ 20% වලින් represent වෙන්නේ just 3 million people in that economy. ඒක mathematics නේ. ඔයාලට ඒක තේරෙනවා නේ? This 20% represent 3 million people. If so, what if I ask this question? This 80% should represent how many people? දැන් අර පොඩි කාලේ අපි හදන ගණන් අච්චරට මෙච්චර නම් මෙච්චරකට කොච්චරද? ඒතර ඒ වගේ if 20% represent 3 million people, 80% should represent how much? 12 million people. එතකොට අපිට මේවා දුන්නේ නැති වුණාට නිකන් S2 කරලා බැලුවම පේනවා මොනවද පේන්නේ? Rate of unemployment is 20% and employed population, let me write here, employed population, how much is that? That's just 12 million. Shape එකේ කියව ගන්න පුළුවන් නේද? Employed population is 12 million, right? And the rate of unemployment is 20%. So ඔය දෙකත් අපිට නිකන් බැලුවම තේරෙන දේවල්. එහෙනම් what do they ask us to calculate? They ask us to calculate labor force participation rate in this economy is. Okay, so how do we find this labor force participation rate? That is very simple. We take labor force to the numerator and that is divided by the working age population, right? Working age population in the economy. Right. What මම මේක තව චුට්ටක් explain කළොත් එහෙම, this labor force mainly consists of two types of people. So what are the two types of people we have here? We have, let's say, unemployed people and then we have employed people. right? We get employed people. So those are the two components coming under labor force, and that is divided by, once again, we can write working age population in the economy. So if you multiply this by, I forgot that actually, if you multiply this by 100, it gives you the labor force participation ratio. Yeah, so this is into 100. So unemployed population is given to us in the question as 3, and the employed population we found using a very simple calculation, we found that value to be 12, and that is divided by the working age population, which is 25, and we should multiply this by 100. So simply 15 over 25 into 100, this is 4 into this thing is 60%. So labor force participation ratio in this economy is 60%. See, fifth one is the answer. What make a පැහැදිලි ඇති කියලා මම හිතනවා. නමුත් මම ඕනේ නම් ආයමත් පාරක් ඒ කතන්දරේ පොඩක් පෙන්නන්නම් මෙතන මේ values එක මම ආයමත් මකලා කොහමද උන answer එක 60%. මම අර employed population 12 හැව්වේ කොහොමද කියන එක විතරයි පෙන්නන්නේ. So if rate of employment is 80%, right? Obviously the rate of unemployment has to be 20%. See, this is the rate of unemployment. As a percentage, that's 20. මිනිස්සු 100ක් හිටියොත් 20% unemployed. 20 unemployed. එතකොට ඒ 20% කියන that whatever the percentage really represents only 3 million people as per the data given. එහෙනම් if 20% represent 3 million people, this employed 80% should represent how many people? We should have 12 million people under employed category. එහෙම තමයි මම ඔය 12 million හොයාගත්තේ. ඒක තමයි මම මෙතනදී use කළේ into this calculation. Right? So we get the answer 60%. Right. 48th one. Look at this one. According to the 2012-13 house. Okay, see that now. This is not the relevant one for your A-level year. So I'm going to skip this question, because no point of discussing the answer here. Right. So 49th, despite the reduction in absolute poverty level of Sri Lanka, significant income inequalities continue to persist. Yeah, that could be true. This is confirmed by the percentage of total household income held by the richest 10% of household. See, once again, the total income held by the richest 10% changes. So this answer should be based on a previously done survey. So that answer is not going to be relevant to your A-level year. So I'm going to skip this question as well. Right. The 50th, which one of the following is not a major obstacle? Sitana, is not a major obstacle to attract foreign direct investment in Sri Lanka, which is not a major obstacle. තියෙන තරම් ඔක්කොම ඉතින් obstacles තමයි, but ඒගොල්ලෝ එහෙම නැතිවකුත් දීලා තියෙනවා. අපි එක බලමු. First one, unstable macroeconomic condition is an obstacle. Nobody will come and invest here if the macroeconomy is unstable. The second one, labor market rigidities. Again, the labor market, they are lack of skills and they can't even adapt to the new technology. So if those problems are there, then nobody will come and start factories here. So that is also an obstacle. The third one, uncertainty of policies. See that now, last week May week change karna, last month May month change karna. So if the policies are uncertain, if they get changed frequently, again no one will come and invest. The fourth one, corruption and weak regulations. So this is also an obstacle. And the fifth one, lack of diversification in export sector. See, this is not directly related to the foreign investments. This is a problem in our export sector. We haven't diversified the products. So that's why our export income is low. Export income low, it won't affect directly to attract foreign direct investments. Then this is not a major obstacle to attract foreign direct investment. So that's why fifth one is the answer for this question 50.